get all of the librarians together every couple of weeks so that we can have a meeting and say, what's going on? What initiatives are we doing? You're working in instruction, you're working in collection development, you're working in outreach. What's the intersection? Or as someone from the outside of your different areas, what are you thinking of? And that way it's not just me interacting with each individual librarian and saying, okay, here's what I think. It's the other ones all saying, oh, well, this is a good idea. And we can bounce things off each other. I'm very happy to delegate things that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you say that networking is a very big part of
That's interesting. I think networking...
being that in a community college, networking?
Yes, I think it is a big part, but I'm going to qualify that. I think that networking among the other community colleges is really useful. And then you get your own networks that you build. So there are times where I think, okay, this isn't something that someone in a community college can really help me with. Fortunately, I know people in public libraries or things like that. Mm-hmm. It really does come in handy there, but in terms of managerial work, it really is the community college and the statewide ones to a very small extent outside of the state. But I think we have a fairly good support system here, and I know I've been able to pick up the phone, and I know others have picked up their phone and called me, and we've been able to talk to each other about issues we're facing and strategies that we might be able to share with each other. But
so networking kind of goes hand in hand with creating a relationship with other people.
Oh yes, it very much does. It very much does. But one thing that's kind of curious is I found this at my previous job at a large state school, and I find it here, and I'm certain it doesn't exist in all environments, but the library here can still be an afterthought. So on campus, networking is actually tougher. Okay. Within our own profession, the networking is super easy to do because we all speak the same language. We all know what we're talking about. But trying to convey what the library needs and what the library can do outside of the library still remains very difficult. And even though it's a smaller school than I came from, it's still really hard to make those connections. And even where you can make the connections so that you're all very cordial or friendly and chummy, people still don't necessarily get what the library needs or wants. Mm-hmm. So an example where this comes up is in all new faculty hires need to go through an academic staffing committee process. And I've sat on the committee, I currently chair the committee, and we've put through requests for librarians in the past, and successfully. But when those requests come through, we find ourselves having to use this form that all the other departments use, and it talks about things like full-time equivalent for students and weekly, oh my god, WISHY-FOOTY is the acronym, and I can still not remember what it, but weekly student contact hours, that's it, WISHY. and there's ratios of that to full-time equivalent and all these sort of things, and then it gets scored that way, and the library comes in and says, well, basically, your department has 400 full-time equivalent students. We have several thousand full-time equivalent students that we see, and they can't connect to that idea. So even though we're all sitting in a room and we all like each other and we all get along, it's still very tough to get them to understand what we need. And we're always the ones put in the position of having to understand what they need, Mm-hmm. So networking on campus remains a challenge. Okay. It can be a challenge.
Okay. Now, going off of that, if I can ask, what is your process of implementing change to kind of help in that?
So the start, implementing change to help with networking on campus. Mm-hmm. I think it actually goes back to the conversations that we have here as the full-time librarians, because we each have our own relationships on campus. So I've got an instruction librarian who has a very particular relationship and arguably has the closest relationship with the different instructors because he's been here longest, but also because he partners with them to do the library instruction sessions. I've got someone whose job is to do outreach, and what she is really good at, she doesn't necessarily work with the faculty, but her work has taken her into other support units on campus. And that's where the library sometimes finds more natural allies with the support units. And then I've got the Technical Services and Collection Development Librarian, and she forms a particular relationship because faculty demand books or other materials, and so they work through her. So in order to make change, it's bringing us together and thinking about, okay, how do we move this forward? It tends not to be a sweeping thing, though. It's kind of like, let's talk together, let's think about what initiative we can do. So for example, out of a conversation among the few of us, we decided we wanted to target the English department to really get our instruction program in there further. And in doing so, then we hope, given appreciation, a mutual appreciation of what the English department and the library can do for each other. So it starts off at that conversational planning level there, and then moves into an actual concrete idea where we then bring in partners on campus and we start to plan out, okay, how do we implement this? Who do we need to talk to on top of this? When do we implement it? What is the timeline? How do we measure it? All those sorts of questions get asked. Given that it is a small number of us, we haven't been able to make too many inroads. It's kind of like, let's pick something, focus on it, see it through to fruition, and then move on to the next thing. It's been a case of that, so it's slow change. But I hope that it's deliberated. It's not just us kind of saying, well, let's just go out and talk to everyone and make them appreciate us. It's more trying to go through a process from its brainstorming through to actual implementation and measurement, and then revision of it as needed.
Okay. Now, going on to the library, how much planning and do you have much say in the planning and the maintenance? Because I know that they've been doing a lot of work on the community, on the campus, excuse me.
Yes.
So I know that they changed all of that. This was not there when I was here, and it's completely changed.
So there are campus level planning documents that get put into place, and there's consultation done with every unit. So there's a facilities master plan is what it's called, that's updated every several years, every 5 years, I believe. And that was just last year that we did the most recent implementation of it. So yes, everyone on campus received this sort of the same, here's the template for how we want you to put things forward. I was invited then to fill it out on behalf of the library, and also looking at our satellite campus, which will be expanding. And then I report to the Dean for Learning Resources. The tutoring center and distance education also report to him. So we get together weekly to have unit managers meetings where we bring things like our components of the educational master plan, and we'll discuss them, we'll compare them, we'll see where they might fit together, where they might contradict each other, so that we can ensure that those contradictions are either justified or smoothed out. And then revisions, and then the process also involved me and the other unit managers for that matter, but I had to sit down with an administrator who had my document and said, okay, now follow-up questions and that. So we are very much plugged into the planning process that way. In terms of the shorter term things, for example, we're renovating our instruction lab here on the second floor of the library. That was something that arises wholly within the library from a need that we as a group determined, the group being the full-time faculty librarians. You know, this is something that we'd lived with for some time. We'd all had experience teaching in the room. We came to realize the limitations of it, and we talked about how it might be remodeled to make it a more effective teaching space. It then mostly lands with me to plan that out, and that goes through the program review process that I mentioned earlier, because it involves budgetary things. So we indicate in there, here's our intention, here's our goal, here's what we need for it, here's the actual breakdown of the cost of equipment. And it took a couple of years of asking for that because they don't fund everything every year. But you indicate through the program review process where you want to go, and facilities gets included in that.
Got it, okay. Now, can I ask what you think, and this might seem repetitive, but we just want to make sure we get as
Sure,
much
absolutely.
as we can. What would you say is the most important part of planning and maintenance within the library?
This might surprise you, but documentation.
Mm.
We can have all these conversations, and we can make sure that we follow through timelines and steps, but you need to have the documentation there. I've found this in many jobs, many positions in the past, but I hold on to all my emails, for example.
Mm.
I have thousands upon thousands of emails that I've got archived and I can look through, and that's not the only documentation. Program review is self-documentation, but you need to have these things to point back to because you need to know what everyone decided on. So we have these conversations as the four of us sitting in this room here, and then I'll follow up and say, so here's what we decided. Some of it we don't need to record, some of it's just kind of fun brainstorming, and we don't need to take everything down. But otherwise it's, okay, now here's what's decided, here's where I'm going next, and then I've got that written out. That also comes out in things like the twice yearly retreats that we do with all of the library staff. Mm-hmm. So there's an agenda there where it lays out, here's what's going on that we're going to talk about. All those pieces of documentation really help me as a manager be able to refer back. It helps me as a manager be able to push things forward as well, because then I can go to people and say, well, remember we talked about this on this date, or here's the actual where it says here's where the money is coming from. You have all those pieces of evidence that you can point to. Mm-hmm. and get your process moving through. So documentation always helps.
Key. Okay. Now, can I ask how much time? How much time marketing? How much time do you spend on marketing for the library's most important stakeholders?
Oh, you know what? I don't spend much time on marketing.
Okay.
That's the interesting thing, because that's something I've been able to push off to the others, depending what area they're working in.
Okay.
So the instruction librarian is marketing a particular service. He also is actually responsible for electronic resources. So anytime we want to take on trials of new resources or change them in any way, that's his responsibility. I've got an outreach librarian, that's not formally her title, but she came on board for an equity, diversity, and funding initiative. And her job is to be reaching out to all these different units on campus, such as DSP&S for students with disabilities, or veterans, because these are populations that have been identified as ones at risk in some form or another. So she does marketing. And my colleague who does collection development, she's reaching out to the various parts of the campus community and saying, here's what we've got that's new, here's our materials, what is it you need? So a lot of that has been put out there by them, which leaves relatively little for me to have to worry about. And she actually is also our web librarian, and so she takes charge of our social media presence, Facebook, Twitter, and just the web pages themselves. So it's been very freeing for me to not have to have that on my plate, because then I can focus on more of the planning and programming processes that I need to deal with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there are some important aspects of the marketing that you would want to be included in, or are you just more comfortable with letting them?
I'm fairly comfortable with letting them do things, but what I do is so I mentioned several times that we get together as a group. I also meet with each of them every 2 weeks, where individually, okay. Yes. And so we check in on what they're working on, and I can give guidance on things, because the one of them has been here longer than I have by a number of years, but the other two are relatively new, and so I'm able to say, well, have you considered plugging into this or this, either at the college or even outside of the college, for that matter. There are times when opportunities come up. There are, every so often, it may be that we need to go to the Board of Trustees. This has happened, or there's a campus-wide planning team. There's a management advisory committee on campus, and it's been good to be able to go in and demonstrate new services, because these are bodies that, well, with the Board of Trustees, they're funding these things, and you want to show once in a while that they're getting some bang for their buck. but there also, these other meetings have a lot of the deans, and if you get to the deans, then things can filter down to the department chairs and everything.